He found the Giant Queen's children alone on a hostile world and chose to protect them, never expecting what she'd demand in return. Ryan knelt in alien sand, armor scuffed, laughing as 3 tiny royal terrors climbed him like a living throne. Stay with this one, because the day he volunteered for babysitting duty on a hostile planet was the day an 8-foot queen chose him. The desert sky was the color of burnt copper when Ryan Solis's shuttle came apart around him. Warning runes flared across his visor. The dropship bucked, something screamed in the engines, and then the world became heat, roaring wind, and the bright certainty that his contract with the Coalition Marines was about to end in a very boring line of text. KIA. Equipment unrecoverable. Instead, the shuttle skipped along the sand like a thrown rock, shed 2 stabilizers, ripped half a wing off on a buried strut of alien metal, and somehow stopped. Ryan hung from his crash webbing in stunned silence, listening to the tick-tick-tick of cooling panels and the distant groan of the broken hull settling behind him. His heart hammered. Both legs worked. Both arms worked. Nothing leaking that shouldn't be. Solace, he muttered to himself, unclipping the harness. You really gotta stop dying on paperwork. He dropped to the deck, grabbed his rifle and helmet, and kicked the emergency hatch. Desert heat punched into the cabin, carrying the dry tang of dust and scorched alloy. Beyond the ruined ramp, the planet stretched in ripples of gold, dunes, shattered rock, and looming in the near distance, the skeletal remains of a much larger ship half buried in sand like some dead leviathan. That was new. His mission brief had promised a quiet survey escort. 1 coalition science team, 1 small craft, quick orbit back to base. No wrecked capital ship, no hostile signatures. Yet even at this distance, he could see the curves of armor plating, the layered fins of a Royal-class cruiser, the kind only built by a single species in this quadrant, the Giantess Imperium. Fantastic, he sighed, sealing his helmet. I crash in the 1 sandbox owned by people who can punt me into orbit. His HUD flickered as it synced to the suit's external sensors. No active weapons locks, no obvious beacons. The cruiser looked old. Scorched from re-entry or battle, its hull split open to the sun. Broken banners hung in tatters from a tilted fin, their colors bleached but still faintly regal. Ryan started toward it anyway. Because where there was a wreck, there might be a beacon. Where there was a beacon, there might be a ride off this oven. The sand shifted under his boots, fine and loose. Heat bled through the armor plates along his thighs. Sweat tickled his spine. He adjusted the rifle across his chest and kept walking, watching for movement, listening for the telltale whine of grav drives or the deeper thrum of Giantess footfalls. The Imperium's warriors were big, fast, and famously touchy about trespassers. Just in, grab the distress signal, out, he told himself. No getting stepped on, no getting vaporized, no... The sand to his right giggled. Ryan froze. It wasn't quite a giggle, actually. More like a series of high bubbling chirps, mashed together with the loose sliding sound of something small and excited scrambling through dunes. He pivoted. Rifle up. A tiny head popped out of the sand like a startled meerkat. It was round and baby-soft, with pale sea-green skin, giant violet eyes, and pointed ears that stuck out sideways like impatient question marks. A curl of downy hair perched on top, on the color of silver moonlight that hadn't decided if it wanted to be white or lavender yet. The little creature blinked at him. Ryan blinked back. Then 2 more heads erupted nearby, one a light lilac shade, one a softer teal, both sporting the same pointed ears, huge eyes, and fuzz of hair. All 3 wore miniature tunics the color of sun-warmed apricot, already stained with sand, and something suspiciously like drool. Ryan said eloquently. The nearest toddler squealed, before he could decide whether to retreat or call for the world's most specific backup. "Hello, command. I found contraband alien babies." Tiny hands were patting his shin armor. One of them tried to bite the reinforced plating. Another grabbed his finger with damp, startlingly strong little fists. They were laughing. Actually laughing. He'd heard recordings of Giantess battle songs. He'd watched shaky helmet footage of their queens striding through war zones like living myths. Those images lived in the same mental folder as supernovas and black holes. Beautiful, distant, deadly. None of the files had mentioned they came in pocket-sized chaos gremlin versions. Hey, careful," he murmured, lowering the rifle and dropping to one knee so he didn't tower over them. "Armor's not on the menu, champ." The green one clapped at the sound of his voice. The lilac one reached for his gloved hand and tried to fit all 3 of his fingers into their mouth at once. The third rolled bodily into his lap, giggling, then attempted to scale his chest plate like a climbing wall. "You are very small," Ryan told them, which made 0 sense but felt accurate. "And I am so unbelievably not certified for this. No parents nearby, no guards. Just 3 obviously royal toddlers. Those tunics were fine woven, the fabric tech definitely not local, and a wrecked cruiser bleeding broken metal into the sand." A new thought slid into place, cold and sharp. This wasn't just a lost ship, it was a crashed nursery. "Okay," he said softly, scanning the horizon again, pulse ramping. "Where's your detail, little ones? Where's everybody else?" One of them answered by stuffing a fistful of sand into their mouth and making a face. Rian winced, scooped them up, and tried to dust gritty grains from tiny green lips. The kid made a noise halfway between a protest and a delighted squeal and latched onto the strap of his chest harness instead. The others took this as an invitation. In seconds, his lap was full of wriggling pastel limbs and soft, chubby weight. Their skin was warm under his gauntlets, humming faintly with the low-level bioelectric aura Imperium species radiated. They trusted him. They shouldn't. He was a stranger, an armed soldier from a foreign coalition they were technically not at war with, but technically did a lot of heavy lifting. Ryan swallowed, throat suddenly tight. "Right," he murmured. "New mission. Keep the tiny royalty alive. Don't get atomized when their mom shows up." Because if these were royal, if this was a queen's cruiser, then somewhere nearby was a woman who could snap him in half with one hand and would absolutely do so if she thought he'd even looked at her children wrong. He looked down at the little faces beaming up at him. The lilac one patted his cheek with a drooly hand. The teal one made a serious effort to pry open one of the pouches on his belt. The green one pressed their forehead to his chest plate with a little sigh that hit him harder than any plasma round. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "Okay, I'll risk it." He slung his rifle behind his back, freeing both arms, and stood carefully, cradling 2 of them against his chest, while the third clung to his shoulder strap like a determined koala. They weighed almost nothing. His armor creaked. Their laughter spilled across the empty dunes. Somewhere deep in the broken cruiser, something boomed, a low, metallic groan that sent a shiver through the sand. One of the babies startled, little hands clenching in his vest. Without thinking, Ryan rocked them gently, murmuring nonsense reassurances he hadn't used since babysitting his sister's twins back on Luna Station. "It's okay, Sparks, I've got you. Big, scary ship, lot of noise, but she's down, she's done." The crying quieted to soft hiccups against his neck. Ryan exhaled slowly. Humans weren't the toughest species in the galaxy. They didn't have claws or armor plates or gravity-dense skeletons. What they did have, regrettably, was a talent for getting in the middle of problems that weren't theirs and deciding they were emotionally invested. These kids weren't his problem. He adjusted his grip so their little heads were tucked safely under his chin and headed toward the shattered cruiser anyway. As he approached, he could see where the hull had torn open, exposing tangled corridors and crushed compartments. Fire had gutted sections of the interior, leaving blackened supports and slagged conduits, but the forward bay closest to him looked relatively intact. A ramp hung half lowered, like the ship had tried to open and then lost power mid-motion. "Anyone alive in there?" he called over external speakers, pitching his voice calm, non-threatening. "This is Ryan Solis of the Coalition Marines. I have, some very important little people with me." His words echoed into the cracked metal maw. No answer, no movement. He edged closer, every instinct on high alert. The babies squirmed, fascinated by the new scenery. One pointed at the ship and chirped something in a language his translator pinged as Imperial Juvenile Unindexed Dialect. "Yeah," Ryan agreed. "Big ship. Very broken. 10 out of 10. Do not recommend the landing." His humor was mostly for him, but it kept his breathing steady. At the base of the ramp, the sand gave way to metal. He stepped up carefully, testing each plate. The weight distribution of 3 kids plus full armor would be a fun way to discover a structural weakness. "Last call," he said, a little louder. "Any survivors, I'm coming in. Please don't shoot the guy holding your offspring." That was when the shadow fell over him. It wasn't the sun slipping behind a cloud. There were no clouds here. It was more like the light had been personally offended and decided to take a step back. Ryan turned slowly. A figure stood at the edge of the nearest dune, framed by the hard glare of the sky. She was tall enough that she didn't just loom, she redefined the scale of everything around her. 8 feet at least, maybe more, clad in armor that had once been ceremonial gold and deep indigo but was now scorched and spattered with battle stains. "Queen," his brain supplied numbly. Her skin was a rich, luminous turquoise, marked with faint, bioluminescent lines that traced along her throat and down the powerful sweep of her arms. Her hair fell in a heavy silver-white mane to mid-back, braided at the temples with shards of metal and shattered gemstones. Eyes like twin suns, brilliant, molten amber, locked onto him, and then, sharply, onto the 3 small bodies in his arms. The air between them turned razor thin. He felt the moment she registered the scene. An armed human soldier, her ship ruined, her children cradled against foreign armor. 1,000 possible reactions flickered across the tense set of her jaw. Ryan did the dumbest, most human thing imaginable. He smiled. Not the cocky gunslinger grin he used in bars or briefings. A softer thing, crooked and tired, and, he hoped, wildly non-threatening. "They were eating sand," he said, voice steady only because he'd had a lifetime of practice bluffing through terror. "I figured Her Majesty might prefer them crunchy free." For a heartbeat, the desert held its breath. The Queen took a single step forward. The ground answered her weight with a low, patient thrum, like the planet itself acknowledging authority. Her gaze never left Ryan, not the rifle slung behind his back, not the armor, not even the wrecked cruiser behind him, only his arms, only her children. The lilac-skinned toddler spotted her first. "Ma," they chirped, voice bright with instant relief. The green one followed, cheeks dimpling as they waved with both hands. The third squealed outright and tried to launch themselves from Ryan's shoulder like a missile. Ryan tightened his grip just enough to keep gravity from teaching a hard lesson. "Easy, she's right there." The Queen's expression fractured. The sharp, lethal edge he'd sensed softened into something raw and dangerously exposed. In 2 strides she crossed the remaining distance, stopped just short of him, and bent, until her face was level with his. Up close, the bioluminescent lines along her skin pulsed unevenly, betraying stress she hadn't bothered to mask. Burn marks edged her armor. One vambrace hung cracked and dark. Power dead. "You," she said, her voice deep and resonant, layered with harmonic overtones his translator scrambled to resolve. It landed in his ears like gravity itself. "Put them down." "Respectfully," Ryan replied, not moving. They relax better if I hand them over slow. The amber eyes flared. Then, unexpectedly, the queen huffed a short, sharp exhale that might have been laughter if it weren't threaded with exhaustion. You speak to queens as though they are skittish animals. I grew up with goats, he said. Same rules apply. Sudden movements end badly. A beat. Another. The queen extended her arms. Rian shifted carefully, kneeling again so the transfer wouldn't feel like being passed between planets. One by one, he eased the children into her grasp. They clung to her armor, to her hair, to each other, babbling all at once in overlapping bursts of sound. She gathered them against her chest with a practiced, almost reverent motion, one massive hand cradling all three heads without covering a single face. Her shoulders sagged, just a fraction. They were safe. Rian released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and rocked back on his heels. His legs trembled now that the immediate crisis had stepped sideways. I found them about 200 meters out, he said, keeping his tone even, narrative. Ship looked quiet. No guards, no beacons. Thought it was a hazard until they started, testing my armor for snack potential. The queen's gaze flicked up, sharp again, and pinned him in place. You left them alive. Yeah. You did not detain them. Nope. You did not flee. He shrugged. Didn't feel right. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken math. Probability, threat assessment, cultural mismatch. Behind her stoic mask, something shifted. My name, she said at last, is Kalith Urson, sovereign of the seventh brood, empress of the Duneward crown. Rian inclined his head, not a full bow, but respectful enough not to insult either of them. Rian Solace, coalition marine, frequent flyer of bad landings. One of the toddlers tugged Kalith's braid and stuffed part of it into their mouth. She winced, then stilled, letting them gnaw. You should have feared me, she said quietly. Your people fear my kind? Some do, Rian said. Some of us are bad at it. She studied him again, this time slower, cataloging details, the scuffed armor, the careful distance he maintained now that the children were no longer in his arms, the way his hands were open at his sides instead of resting near weapons. You were gentle, Kalith said, the words sounding oddly fragile in her mouth. With lives that are not your own. They're kids, he replied. That kind of overrides uniforms. A faint clicking sound buzzed at the edge of his hearing. Imperial carrycraft engines, small and fast. Kalith tilted her head, listening, then relaxed a fraction more. My guard returns, she said, late, as ever. Guard'll probably assume I'm a problem. They will assume you are a corpse, she corrected, unless I tell them otherwise. Rian met her gaze without flinching. Then I'd appreciate the endorsement. The corners of her mouth twitched despite herself. The carrycraft crested the dune moments later, disgorging a squad of towering Imperium warriors. They froze when they saw her, then saw him, then saw the children nestled safely against her chest. Weapons hovered half-raised, uncertain. Kalith lifted one hand. Every barrel dropped. He delivered them to me, she said, voice ringing, absolute. He is under my protection. Shock rippled through the guard detail. One of them stared openly at Rian like he'd grown another head. Rian scratched the back of his neck. Hi. Kalith turned back to him. Amber eyes softer now, heavy with something unguarded. You have suffered loss today. Your ship. Your path. Happens. She shifted the children higher on her hip. You will come with us. Rian hesitated. That doesn't sound optional. It is not, she agreed, then added almost quietly, but it is not a sentence. It is an invitation. One of the toddlers leaned toward him, reaching out again, fingers grasping at empty air. Kalith watched that small movement with careful attention. You could have taken them, she said low. Used them, bargained. Ryan shook his head. Wouldn't bring myself to cash that chip. Another pause. Then Calith straightened fully, casting a long shadow over him and the sand alike. Then walk with me, human. Let me decide how a queen rewards a man who guarded what he did not own. The transport skimmed low over the dunes, its grav field smoothing the desert into gentle ripples beneath them. Rian sat along the edge bench, armor still dusty, helmet clipped to his thigh, very aware of how small he looked compared to everyone else aboard. Across from him, Calith reclined against a reinforced bulkhead designed for someone of her scale. The children had migrated back to him within minutes of launch. Apparently, royal authority was impressive, but novelty armor still won. One slept against his chest, warm and impossibly light. Another sat on his knee, solemnly attempting to pry open a sealed ration canister. The third had discovered the joy of smacking his vambrace to hear the metallic clink. Calith watched all of it in silence, not the cold, measuring silence he'd expected, but the watchful kind, as if she were memorizing the way her world behaved when she wasn't exerting force on it. "You are calm," she said at last. Ryan glanced up. "I've been shot at by Mantis pirates during engine failure. This ranks medium stress tops." "That is not what I meant." Her gaze shifted to the sleeping child nestled against him. "Many would hold them awkwardly or too tightly. You carry them as if you expect them to trust gravity." He smiled faintly. "Kids always do." One of the guards snorted before catching himself and snapping back to attention. Calith's brow ridges lifted. "You speak as though you have raised young." "Helped," Ryan corrected. "Back home, big family, smaller cousins. Turns out patience scales better than muscle." She considered that, bioluminescence along her throat pulsing in a pattern he was starting to recognize as thought rather than emotion. "You showed no fear when you saw me," she said. "I did," he replied immediately. "I just didn't let it pick my next move." That earned him a sharper look. "Explain." "If I'd panicked," he said, shrugging a shoulder so the sleeping baby didn't jostle, "someone would have gotten hurt. Maybe me, maybe you. Definitely them." Calith's jaw tightened. "You assume responsibility easily," she said, "because that is dangerous." "Yeah," he said, "but sometimes it works." The transport dipped, beginning its descent toward a sheltered canyon, where a temporary Imperium encampment glowed against the rock walls. Medical platforms, energy shields, and crystalline structures rose in elegant clusters, all scaled for giants. And one human. As they touched down, Calith rose smoothly. Ryan stood as well, adjusting his grip as the children protested being relocated again. Calith paused, then nodded once. "Keep them," she said. "Seriously?" "They cling to you," she said simply. "I will not convince them otherwise right now." That felt heavier than any order. They disembarked together. Imperium attendants bowed deeply as Calith passed, eyes flicking sideways at Ryan with open disbelief. Whispered clicks and subsonic murmurs rippled through the camp. The queen walks beside a human. The broodlings remain calm. He touched them. Ryan heard enough to piece together the rest. Medical staff swarmed Calith, checking armor integrity, burns, and stress markers. She waved them off with practiced impatience, but one healer, a tall, insectoid-looking giantess with translucent crests, paused when she saw the children in Ryan's arms. "They were unattended," the healer said carefully. "Briefly," Calith replied. "Not anymore." The healer inclined her head toward Ryan. "You stabilized them?" "Prevented sand ingestion," Ryan said. "Minimal heroics." The healer clicked in approval. "Acceptable." Calith gestured, and a pair of attendants brought a low seat reinforced with adaptive plating, scaled down clumsily for human use, but padded. "You will rest here," Calith said, "until my ship's status is clear." "And after?" Ryan asked. Her eyes held his. "That depends on how honest you were about your intentions." "Fair enough." She turned to issue commands, voice carrying authority that bent the space around it. Rian watched her for a moment, how the camp aligned to her presence, how even her fatigue moved with purpose. Then the child on his knee yawned, stretched, and promptly fell backward. Ryan caught them easily, reflexes snapping into place. A ripple of sound spread through the onlookers, not quite laughter, not quite shock. Caliph turned. For a single unguarded moment, her expression softened completely. Awe, relief, something dangerously close to gratitude. She looked away almost immediately, clearing her throat. "You will eat," she said, unnecessarily loud. "Imperium hospitality extends to those under my protection." "I'm starting to feel very underprotected," Rian said mildly. "Everyone's staring like I diffused a bomb with my face." "You prevented a greater catastrophe," she replied, quieter now. "Imperial young imprint strongly during stress." He didn't like the sound of that. "Imprint how?" Caliph studied him. "They may remember you." The idea landed between them with surprising weight. Ryan glanced down at the sleeping trio, at the relaxed lines of their faces, the small trust curled instinctively against him. "Well," he said softly, "I hope it's a good memory." Caliph watched him longer than necessary. "So do I," she said. The night cycle settled over the canyon in slow, shifting colors. The Imperium didn't do darkness the way humans did. Instead, soft bands of bioluminescent light traced the camp, glowing stones embedded in the ground and walls, casting everything in calm gradients of blue and gold. Shadows existed, but they were gentle, like suggestions. Rian sat where he'd been placed, boots dangling slightly above the ground. One child sprawled bonelessly across his chest, another wedged against his side, the third nestled into the crook of his arm. He hadn't moved in a while. No one asked him to. Apparently, interrupting a calm brood was a social misstep even he could understand. Food arrived. Nutrient plates scaled awkwardly small, steaming with unfamiliar scents. Ryan ate carefully, one-handed, discovering that Imperium cuisine leaned heavily toward sweet spiced roots and protein gels that tasted like honeyed almonds if almonds had opinions. "Not bad," he murmured. The teal-skinned toddler cracked one oversized eye open, observed his chewing with interest, and stuck 2 fingers into his ration tray. Rian sighed. "I knew this was coming." Across the camp, Caliph stood at a command table, hollow maps hovering around her in slow rotation. The glow picked out the exhaustion she'd been hiding. Micro-fractures in her armor, slump tension along her shoulders, a faint hitch in one knee she avoided leaning on. She noticed him watching. Her gaze flicked briefly to the children, then back to him. That unreadable amber look returned, but now it carried a question instead of a threat. She approached, the ground subtly adjusting beneath her steps, and stopped an arm's length away, close enough to ruin his sense of proportion again. "They have entered a rest phase," she said. "They passed out like champions," Ryan replied. "I feel weirdly honored." "They did not cry when they were recovered," she said softly. "That is uncommon." "Guess they were waiting for you," he said. "Or they just felt okay where they were." Caliph's bioluminescent markings pulsed once, brighter than before, then settled. "You make much of ease," she said. "Humans are said to be restless." "Oh, we are," he agreed. "But we're also stubborn about comfort, even borrowed comfort." She looked down at the smallest child asleep against his chest, fingers knotted gently in the fabric of his suit. "You are aware," she said, "that my species measures trust through proximity." "I'm learning that today," Ryan said carefully. "I promise I'm not trying to hack your culture. This just happened." Caliph almost smiled. "In my courts," she said, "this moment would be dissected, your intentions questioned, your presence framed as leverage." "And what do you see, Hida?" he asked. Her answer came without delay. a man who did not abandon what he could have ignored. That hung between them, heavier than ceremony. She gestured toward a nearby platform, low, wide, reinforced. "You will sleep there tonight." Ryan glanced at the platform, then at the three bodies firmly attached to him. "I don't think they're filing a motion to adjourn." "Then you will sleep as you are." That was intimate, in a way that wasn't physical, but still made his chest feel tight. Ryan shifted carefully, reclining onto the platform, using his rolled jacket as extra support so no small heads lolled uncomfortably. The children resettled with soft sounds, unbothered. Caliph remained standing. "You won't?" he asked, realizing it sounded oddly like an invitation. "Queens do not sleep," she said. Then, after a pause, "Not when their worlds are fragile." He didn't push. "For what it's worth, they're safe. You can stand down a notch." She studied him again, longer this time. "You speak to me as though I am merely tired." "You are," he said gently, "also terrifying, but definitely tired." That cracked something. Caliph exhaled slow and controlled, then lowered herself to one knee beside the platform. It made the guards nearby stiffen, but she silenced them with a glance. "They were born during the crossing," she said quietly. "Between systems, power failure, structural breach. I chose the crash vector." Ryan absorbed that. "You saved them." "I saved what I could," she replied. "I failed to remain with them." His instinct was to argue, to reassure, but something told him that wasn't what she needed. "You came back," he said instead, "and they're here." One of the children stirred, reaching blindly. Caliph hesitated only a moment before extending a finger. Tiny hands closed around it instantly, her composure nearly shattered. Ryan watched that connection form, clean and wordless, and felt something tilt inside him. Not fear, not even awe. Recognition. "You didn't reward me yet, Your Majesty," he said lightly, easing the weight in the air. "I hear that's part of my continued survival chances." She huffed softly. "You are alive because I will it." So far we're batting 100. Her eyes flicked to his face again. "Do not mistake protection for conclusion, human. You remain an anomaly." He smiled, slow and warm. "Story of my life." Caliph rose, but this time without armor in her posture. "Tomorrow," she said, "when we discuss what happens next." Sounds ominous. "It will be honest?" She paused, then added quieter. "And that is rarer." As she turned away, one of the children shifted again, clutch tightening. Ryan stayed still long after the camp settled, staring up at a sky unfamiliar and brilliant, wondering when exactly surviving had turned into staying, and why, for once, that distinction mattered. Alarms cut through the canyon like blades. Not the shrill panic of human sirens. These were deep, resonant pulses that vibrated through the stone and straight into Ryan's bones. The lights around the camp shifted instantly from soft gold to sharp defensive blue. The child on Ryan's chest startled, fingers clutching his suit. Another made a thin, confused sound in sleep. Ryan was on his feet before he'd finished waking, cradling all three against him with muscle memory honed by far too many bad mornings. "Okay," he murmured, calm by habit. "That's new." Across the camp, Imperium warriors snapped into motion, armor locking, weapons powering with a low predatory hum. Shields flared into existence, hexagonal lattices spanning the open canyon mouth. Caliph was already moving. She cleared the command platform in a single stride, hair whipping behind her, eyes blazing with focused fury. A commander spoke rapidly at her side, voice edged with static and urgency. "Scout signatures confirmed," the commander finished. "Multiple drops, fast." Ryan felt the words settle like ice. "Hostiles?" he called. Caliph didn't slow. "Scavenger clans, they hunt wrecks. And they do. Not avoid nurseries." That snapped something sharp into place. Ryan adjusted his grip, lowering his center of gravity. "Where do you want non-combatants?" Her gaze found him instantly. "You are not non-combatant." "Ma'am," he said level, "I'm holding 3 reasons you brought an empire down around you. Point me." For a fraction of a second she hesitated. Then she gestured toward a secondary passage carved into the canyon wall marked with layered shielding glyphs. "There. Hardened chamber. Get them inside. Now." "On it." The ground trembled as the first impact struck the outer shields. Energy rippled across the barrier like water hitting glass. Ryan ran. He wasn't fast like an Imperium warrior, but he was efficient. Boots pounding along illuminated stone as the canyon echoed with distant concussive blasts. One of the children began to fuss, sensing the shift in the air. He shifted them higher, murmuring nonsense again, voice steady despite the thud of his heart. "Hey, hey, I know. Big noises. We're doing an indoors adventure." A bolt slammed into the shield overhead, flashing bright enough to paint the corridor in stark white. The children squealed, then quieted when Ryan tucked his chin protectively over them. Inside the chamber, a small team of attendants rushed forward, ushering him into the reinforced space. The doors sealed behind them with a thick final clang. Ryan exhaled once. Then the walls shook. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The hum of the shields deepened, strained. He placed the children gently onto a padded cradle grown from the chamber floor, adaptive material rising to support their shapes. 2 immediately burrowed into it. The third stared up at him, eyes bright and unafraid. "Stay," he whispered, though he knew they wouldn't understand the word, only the tone. The child reached up, fingers brushing his wrist. Something twisted in his chest. Outside, the fight escalated fast. Through the chamber's display field, Ryan saw flashes of movement. Imperium warriors locking shields, scattering enemy craft in bursts of light, figures darting and leaping across the canyon walls, too fast, too reckless. Scavengers didn't fight to conquer. They fought to take. One of them broke through. A small drop sled slammed into the canyon wall near the nursery access, skidding sideways, disgorging 3 figures clad in mismatched armor. They moved with feral intent, weapons trained on anything that breathed. Ryan didn't think. He grabbed his rifle off his back and stepped between the chamber door and the incoming threat as the inner shield dropped just enough for him to exit. Outside, Kalith saw him. Her head snapped around, eyes cutting straight through the chaos. "Ryan, no!" "Too late," he said, already moving. The lead scavenger fired. Ryan rolled, the blast scorching stone over his head. He came up kneeling, sighted, and returned fire, clean, controlled bursts that forced the attackers to scatter. One went down hard, another scrambled for cover. The third lunged for the chamber door. Ryan tackled them. They hit the stone in a tangle of armor and limbs. The impact knocked the breath from both of them. The scavenger snarled, bringing a blade up, then froze as a massive shadow fell over them. Kalith stood there, impossible and furious. She reached down, seized the scavenger by the chest plate, and lifted them clear off the ground. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You reached for my brood," she said. She threw them. The body hit the canyon wall with a sound Ryan felt more than heard and did not get back up. Silence rushed in around the remaining skirmish as Imperium warriors finished driving the attackers back. The drop sled exploded as it was cut down mid-retreat. The shields held. The canyon breathed again. Ryan pushed himself to his feet, adrenaline crashing through him in a wave that made his legs shake. He hadn't noticed the burn along his forearm until now, skin sizzling beneath torn fabric. Kalith turned to him slowly. Every instinct told him this was the moment judgment fell. Instead, she crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and caught his arm. Not hard, not gentle, but absolutely certain. "You disobeyed me," she said. "Yep. You exposed yourself to danger. Also, yes, You are injured? Superficially. Her grip tightened. And yet, she said, voice low and vibrating with something he couldn't name, you placed yourself between them and death without hesitation. Ryan met her gaze, breath finally steadying. Didn't feel like a choice. Around them, the camp watched in stunned silence. Calith released his arm slowly, as though afraid of what might show if she held on longer. Her bioluminescent markings flared bright, then dimmed. You will come with me, she said again. This time it wasn't command or invitation, it was something far more dangerous. Resolve. Yeah, Ryan said quietly, I will. The canyon wasn't finished shaking. Even as the last scavenger craft burned out against the shield lattice, Calith's posture stayed coiled, ready. Her guard commander was already issuing rapid-fire updates, more contacts peeling off, residual threats withdrawing, no immediate breach vectors, but she barely acknowledged them. Her attention stayed on Ryan, on the blood seeping through the tear along his forearm, on the way he kept angling his body toward the nursery chamber without realizing it. You are compromised, she said. I'm functional, he replied. Big difference. Calith made a sharp gesture. Medics moved in immediately, then stopped when she lifted one finger without looking at them. I will handle this. That sent a visible ripple through the camp. Queens did not do triage. Queens delegated. Calith closed the distance again and took Ryan's injured arm in both hands, surprisingly careful for someone who could bend starship plating. Her fingers were warm, steady. The bioluminescent lines beneath her skin brightened, tracing slow, deliberate paths as she focused. You are fortunate, she said. The blade grazed. Another angle would have severed muscle. Good thing I zigged, he said, or zagged. Hard to tell in the moment. Her mouth twitched despite herself. She pressed her thumb lightly against the burn. A soft field shimmered into existence, knitting tissue with a faint, tingling heat that made him hiss. That's new, he said, and weirdly comfortable. You are tense, Calith replied. War zone, he said, hard habit to break. Her eyes lifted to meet his. Release it. He didn't know why he obeyed. Maybe because her voice carried the same authority she used on gravity itself. He exhaled slowly. The pain ebbed. When she withdrew her hands, the wound had sealed into a faint scar already cooling. You heal fast, she observed. Humans are annoyingly resilient, he said. We do this thing where we don't give up when common sense says we should. She studied him in silence, then turned as an attendant approached. My queen, the attendant said carefully. The broodlings are agitated. They sense your proximity. Calith stiffened. Without another word, she moved toward the nursery chamber. Ryan followed without being told. Inside, the children were awake now, fidgeting in their cradle, emitting a chorus of questioning chirps. The moment they saw Calith, two reached for her. The third stared past her, straight at Ryan. They squealed in delight. Ryan froze mid-step. I swear I didn't teach them that. Calith paused. Then slowly, she turned back to him. Imperial imprinting wasn't a light thing. It wasn't symbolic or sentimental. It altered bond pathways, shaped memory, affected how young recognized safety and threat. She knew that. So did the healers watching from the doorway, faces carefully blank but eyes sharp with realization. Calith exhaled, long and measured. They associate you with protection. Ryan swallowed. If that's a problem? It is dangerous, she said honestly, to them, to you. But, he guessed. Her gaze softened again, just barely. But it is also revealing. One of the children toddled forward, arms raised in unmistakable demand. Ryan knelt automatically, lifting them with practiced ease. Calith watched every detail. The ease, the lack of pride, the way he adjusted instantly when the child wriggled. Among my people, she said, voice low, strength is proven through dominance, control, endurance. Among mine, Ryan replied. Strength usually shows up when you don't have power and still choose kindness. She considered that in silence, amber eyes reflecting the soft glow of the chamber. Your presence draws threat, she said at last. Scavengers will return, others will hear rumors. About a human babysitter? He asked. About a queen who shields him. Ah, that landed. Ryan shifted his weight, child balanced easily on one hip. Then maybe I shouldn't stick around? The room went very, very still. Calith stepped closer this time, close enough that he could see the faint stress fractures along her collar plate, the places she'd held herself together by will alone. She looked down at him, at the child between them that looked from one face to the other like it was watching a conversation unfold. You misunderstand, she said quietly. I am not debating whether you may remain. He met her gaze, heart thudding. Then what are we deciding? Her bioluminescent markings flared, strong, radiant, uncontrolled, for the first time since he'd met her. We are deciding, Calith said, what it means that you stayed. Outside the chamber, the camp resumed motion. Orders were given, engines cycled, shields recalibrated. Inside, something far more precarious took shape. Calith reached out, not to take the child, but to rest her hand alongside Ryan's, their fingers almost touching. The contact was brief, deliberate, and unmistakably personal. You surprise me, human, she said softly. That is not a debt easily resolved. Ryan smiled, not flippant, not afraid, just real. Lucky for both of us, he replied. I'm bad at clean endings. Her answering breath was almost a laugh, but not yet. Not when the most dangerous part was still ahead. The attack didn't end with explosions. It ended with consequences. By the next rotation, word had spread beyond the canyon. Ryan could feel it before he heard it. Extra patrols, calm traffic layered with tight discipline, officers lowering their voices when Calith passed. The Imperium wasn't panicking, but it was recalculating. And recalculation in an empire built on strength tended to cut sharper than fear. Ryan stood at the edge of the command dais, helmet clipped at his belt, arms relaxed, but ready. He'd learned quickly that pretending not to notice scrutiny only made it worse. So he let them see him, human, scarred, still standing. The children were gone now, moved deeper into the heart of the mobile fortress, surrounded by guards and shielding thick enough to make a small moon jealous. That knowledge should have settled him. It didn't. Calith addressed her officers with iron in her voice, posture restored to full regal authority. The scavenger clans believed me wounded. They believed my brood vulnerable. They were correct only once. A low, approving rumble moved through the gathered ranks. They will test us again, she continued, Aye. Others will notice, and they will ask why a human walks under my shield. Several heads turned toward Ryan, none hostile, all curious. Calith turned too. This is that answer. She stepped down from the dais until she stood beside him, not behind, not in front, beside. This human did not seek favor. He did not seek leverage. He did not flee when logic encouraged it. Her gaze remained forward, but Ryan felt the weight of her attention like gravity pulling sideways. He placed himself between my brood and death without demand of reward. Silence deepened. In doing so, Calith said, he bound himself to this moment as I now bind myself to him. That got reactions, nothing loud, no outbursts, just a collective shift as the implications landed. Bonds in the Imperium were not casual declarations. They carried political weight, cultural gravity, risk. Ryan cleared his throat quietly. Just so we're clear, I didn't rehearse this part. That earned a ripple of startled amusement through the ranks before anyone could stop it. Calith's mouth curved, brief and dangerous. No, she murmured, you improvise. She raised her hand. Energy flared, warm, luminous, and painted a sigil into the air between them. It wasn't a mark of ownership. It wasn't dominance. It was recognition. Ryan Solace, she said, voice resonating through stone and steel alike, is under my personal protection. Any who threaten him do so as if stepping toward my brood. The meaning hit like a gravitational pulse. Ryan inhaled slowly. That's a bigger reward than I was expecting. Kalith turned to him fully now. You have changed the structure of my calculations, she said quietly. You made softness a weapon today. That's usually how it works for us. Her eyes searched his face, not for weakness, but for certainty. You could leave. When repairs are complete, when passage is secured. I could, he agreed. And yet, he thought of 3 small hands grabbing his fingers, of a queen kneeling in the dust because she trusted him to understand what fear looked like when power cracked. I don't think the story's over, he said. That time she did laugh, low, brief, and unmistakably human in warmth. Then she stepped closer, towering over him as ever, but no longer unreachable. Then stay, Kalith said. Stand where my enemies must see you. Walk where my children remember you. Her voice softened, just for him. And let us see what happens when compassion survives a war. The Imperium did not erupt. It adjusted, integrated, allowed, and somewhere deep within the fortress, 3 young voices laughed in their sleep, unafraid, unlost, while the human who found them stood beside a queen who had chosen at last not to stand alone. The fortress moved at dawn, not with haste, with intent. Massive grav sleds detached from the canyon walls, folding shield strata and luminous stone into a traveling citadel that hovered just above the desert floor. The wrecked cruiser was sealed, marked, and left behind like a discarded shell, its purpose spent. Where there had been chaos and exposed nerves, there was now direction. Rian stood on a forward observation deck as the land slid beneath them, arms resting on a rail scaled absurdly large for him. Wind tugged at his hair, warm and clean, carrying none of the scorched panic of the previous cycle. For the first time since his crash, his pulse sat somewhere near normal. Kalith joined him without announcement. She didn't wear her full armor now. The ceremonial plating was gone, replaced by layered travel mantle and fitted guards that allowed more movement than intimidation. Power still rolled off her in quiet waves, but stripped of the spectacle, she looked realer. You didn't sleep, she said. Didn't feel right, he replied. Plus your city hums, hard to ignore. The shields sing when they're satisfied, she said. They approve of forward motion. Ryan smiled. I get that. They stood side by side for a while, watching dunes give way to dark stone flats and ribboning mineral veins that glowed faintly in the light. No urgency, no audience. Kalith spoke first. I have lived my life being watched. Comes with crowns, Rian said. Yes, she agreed, but being seen is different. She turned her head slightly, studying him in profile. You look at me without measuring how I might be used. Too much math, he said. I try not to optimize people. Her bioluminescent markings brightened subtly, an Imperium sign of private agreement. The Council will challenge my declaration, she said. Not openly, but they will test its endurance. Testing's familiar territory, he replied. What kind? Political pressure, symbolic distance, invitations you are not meant to accept. She met his eyes. And threats that arrive disguised as courtesy. Ryan considered that. Good thing I'm terrible at subtext. That, she said dryly, is becoming clear. They were interrupted by the soft patter of approaching steps. Lighter, quicker. Kalith turned just in time to see 3 small figures toddling toward them, shepherded by 2 attendants who were clearly trying very hard not to interfere. The toddlers made it 3 meters before breaking into uncoordinated sprints. Ryan barely had time to crouch before he was bowled over. Hey, he laughed, As they collided with his chest and arms, clinging with triumphant squeals, one grabbed his collar, another tried to climb his shoulder, the third planted their forehead against his sternum and sighed like a scholar reaching a conclusion. Calith watched, expression unreadable, until one of them reached back and tugged insistently at her mantle. She hesitated only a heartbeat before kneeling beside them. Ryan adjusted position so they both fit into the small circle of attention. For a moment, the Empress, the human, and the future of an empire existed at the same level, grounded and utterly incompatible with ceremony. "They sleep better near you," Calith said quietly. "Probably the snoring," Ryan teased. "Very reassuring." She shook her head faintly. "They listen to your heartbeat." That stilled him. "I didn't realize it got picked up," he said softer now. "They are not listening for sound," she replied. Something unspoken passed between them, understanding without vocabulary. Around them the fortress adjusted its course, engines humming approval. Nothing broke, no alarm sounded. The Imperium continued forward, not altered by conquest or fear, but by choice. Calith rose slowly, careful not to startle the children, and extended a hand, not commanding, not demanding. An offer. Ryan looked at it, then at her, then down at the three small reasons he had stopped being transit and started being anchored. He took her hand. Not as subject, not as possession, just as someone who stayed. The future loomed ahead, complicated, watched, unfinished, and for once Ryan didn't feel like bracing for impact. He felt like moving towards something. The weeks that followed did not soften. They layered. The fortress crossed territories that shifted in allegiance with every broadcast ping. Envoys arrived in ships too polished to trust, voices smooth with calculated curiosity. Formal dinners were staged where every seat placement mattered, where Ryan's presence was noted with careful pauses and glances that tried and failed to categorize him. Human, civilian, protector, variable. Ryan wore none of it elegantly. He said the wrong things at the wrong moments, laughed when silence was expected, and refused several honorary placements that came with scripted obedience attached. Calith watched him do it all without interference, and that, more than any declaration, unsettled the Imperium courts. "He disrupts symmetry," one elder muttered during a closed assembly. Calith replied evenly, "Symmetry did not save my children." The ripple that followed reached far beyond the chamber. Ryan learned quickly where he fit. Not in councils, not in thrones, but in motion. He trained with the guards in the hours before dawn, adapting human techniques to giant-scale formations. He helped engineers rewrote internal systems designed without room for improvisation. He listened when Calith spoke at night, when the weight of rule loosened just enough for fatigue to breathe. Sometimes they spoke of strategy, sometimes they spoke of nothing. He never asked for definition, not for titles, not for promises. He stayed consistently, reliably, in the way humans often forgot was a choice worth making. One evening, as stars unfamiliar and brilliant scattered across the viewport, Calith found him seated on the floor of the brood chamber, 3 children draped across his legs and shoulders like a victorious pile. "You are becoming expected," she said. "That sounds dangerously close to permanent," he replied. "In my people," she said, lowering herself beside him, "expectation is trust extended forward." One of the toddlers mumbled something in sleep and pressed closer to him, small hand tangled in his fingers. Calith watched the motion with quiet intensity. "They do not treat you as guests," she said, "nor guard, nor curiosity." "What do they treat me as?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Outside the viewport, distant stars flared as the fortress adjusted course, not away from danger, but toward political crossroads thick with uncertainty. "They treat you," Calith said at last, "as one who returns." The weight of that settled, not heavy, but shaping. Ryan exhaled slowly. "Good, because I was running out of excuses not to." She looked at him then. Really looked. Not as queen, not as symbol, but as a woman who had chosen to survive without closing herself. "You will be challenged," she said. "I tested. There are those who fear what you represent more than what you are." "I get that," Rian replied. "I scare myself sometimes." Her mouth curved faintly. "So do I." The fortress lights dimmed into rest cycle hues. The children slept on, dreaming dreams shaped by safety rather than survival. Ahead lay councils, rivals, storms not yet named, questions neither of them pretended to answer tonight. Kalith rose and extended her hand again, but this time, without ceremony, without witnesses, Ryan took it. And in that simple exchange, no fanfare, no declaration, the future bent slightly as futures do when something stubborn and compassionate refuses to break. The story did not end there. It widened. The message reached them weeks later, carried on a priority channel so old it predated half the protocols now governing Imperial space. A fractured audio burst, a human distress cadence, then silence. Ryan listened without interrupting. Expression gone still in that way Kalith had come to recognize. Not fear, not rage, but focus, narrowing until the world simplified into choices. "Coalition," he said quietly when it ended. "Deep fringe. They shouldn't be that far inside scavenger lanes." Kalith studied the star map blooming above the console, roots and radii folding into clarity. The signal origin sat just beyond their projected path. Close enough to touch, far enough to ignore. Council doctrine would recommend caution, diplomatic channels, delay. She did none of those things. "Adjust course," Kalith ordered. "Intercept window in 14 cycles." The bridge stilled. One commander hesitated. "My queen, this would draw attention." "Yes," she said evenly. "That is the point." She turned to Ryan. "You always run toward the sound of need," she said, "even when it complicates survival." He met her gaze, something warm and unyielding in his eyes. "You don't." "I did not," she agreed. "Until you." The fortress shifted, engines responding with a deep, satisfied resonance as their trajectory bent, just a little, toward consequence. Behind reinforced walls, 3 small figures slept on, unaware of politics or peril, secure in the certainty that when the universe trembled, someone would pick them up. Rian rested a hand against the viewport, watching the stars slide into unfamiliar alignments. "Looks like we're not done," he said. Kalith stepped beside him, shoulder close enough that he could feel the faint heat of her presence. "No," she replied softly, "we are becoming." Ahead lay conflict, alliance, stories that would be told wrong and remembered longer than truth allowed. But for now, this moment, this choice, they moved forward together. And the universe, strange and vast, adjusted accordingly. The interception took 2 hours. Space went quiet in the way that meant something was about to break. The fortress slid out of fold just beyond the signal's last known vector, engines dimmed to a respectful hum. Debris drifted ahead, shattered hull plating, burned insulation spiraling lazily, the unmistakable scatter of a coalition escort that had fought hard and lost direction rather than courage. Rian leaned forward at the viewport, jaw set. No bravado now, just intent. "There," he said, pointing. "Life signs. Faint." Kalith didn't ask for confirmation. She didn't need to. Orders rippled outward, precise and calm. Rescue craft launched. Med teams stood ready. Shields widened, not flared. An assertion rather than a challenge. The first survivors came aboard shaken, bloodied, stunned to find themselves crossing the threshold of an Imperium mobile fortress. They stared at Kalith in open disbelief. Then they saw Ryan. "Holy," one of them breathed. "Solace? Thought you bid it months ago." He grinned, crooked and familiar. "Rumors of my demise were convenient." Relief broke through shock. Laughter followed, thin but real. Caliph watched the exchange quietly, cataloging reactions not as intel but as culture. These humans didn't kneel. They didn't posture. They relaxed simply because one of their own was still standing. Later, after wounds were sealed, after water and rest were distributed, Caliph found Ryan alone in a quiet transit corridor, helmet tucked under his arm, staring at the soft glow of imperial sigils in the floor. "You knew this would complicate matters," she said. He nodded once. "You still turn toward it?" "Yes," she said softly, "and my counsel will argue that I am changing precedent." He glanced at her. "Are they wrong?" Caliph considered the question seriously. Precedent exists to preserve stability, but survival requires adaptation. She met his gaze. "You are adaptive. That might be the nicest thing anyone said about me this week." Silence stretched, not awkward, not heavy, comfortable in a way neither of them had been trained for. "You could return them to Coalition space," she said, "earn favor, repair bridges." "I could," he agreed, "but I won't leave you holding the political fallout alone." That earned a look. Sharp, almost startled. "I am capable," she said. "I know," Ryan replied. "That's not why I'm staying." Understanding settled between them, unspoken and unwavering. The fortress resumed its course with additional ships in tow. Rescued, reoriented, alive. Stories would spread, some exaggerated, some dangerously accurate. A human who stood under a queen's protection. A queen who adjusted her empire's trajectory for compassion. Children who laughed without fear in halls once built only for power. None of it clean. None of it finished. Caliph rested a hand lightly at Ryan's back as they watched the stars realign. An unconscious gesture she didn't pull away from. "Whatever comes next," she said quietly, "it will not be small." Ryan smiled, steady and unafraid. "Good. I was never built for small." The fortress moved on, carrying more than steel and shields now. It carried choice, and the universe once again would have to make room for it. The choice caught up with them at the edge of settled space, not as violence, as ceremony. Imperium beacons aligned as the fortress slowed, stellar traffic parting with deliberate caution. A council delegation waited ahead, massive ships, polished hulls, symbols etched so deeply into alloy they read like scars. This wasn't an ambush, it was judgment. Ryan stood with Caliph at the forward dais, no armor this time, just a fitted travel jacket, scars visible, posture easy. The children were secure behind them, watched by guards who now smiled without realizing it. "Once we cross that threshold," Ryan said quietly, "everything we did becomes official." "Yes," Caliph replied. "After this, nothing can be unsaid." He considered her profile, regal even now, but no longer rigid. "You ready?" She didn't look away from the stars. "I ruled by endurance for many cycles. I am ready to rule by consequence." The council broadcast came through, formal, layered, heavy with ritual phrasing that took minutes to circle its intent. Concern for stability, questions of precedent, the appropriateness of a human presence so near the heart of imperial authority. Caliph listened, then raised one hand. "I will speak plainly," she said. Silence fell so complete Ryan felt it in his teeth. "My children live because a human chose them over survival. I trust him because he never asked me to kneel in return. Any empire that cannot endure such a connection deserves to fracture." No shouting. No flourish. Just truth. A pause followed, long enough that Ryan wondered if this was the part where history pivoted or snapped. Then the eldest counselor inclined their head. "Then the Imperium endures," they said. The acknowledgement rippled outward, not applause, not surrender. Acceptance. The fortress continued forward. Later, much later, Rian found himself back in the brood chamber. 3 small bodies piled against him, breathing soft and deep. Calith watched from the doorway, arms folded loosely, tension finally absent from her stance. "You changed more than policy," she said. He smiled faintly. "I have a talent for that." She moved closer, sitting beside him this time without hesitation, shoulder brushing his. The contact was unremarkable now. Familiar. "They will grow strong," Calith said, watching her children, "in a universe that will test them." Ryan looked down at the sleeping chaos he'd stumbled into and kept anyway. "Yeah, but they won't start scared." She turned to him then, not as queen, not as symbol, but as a woman who had survived losing everything except her will. "You stayed," she said. He answered simply, "I meant it." Outside stars shifted as roots recalculated around a moving empire that had learned a new trick, bending without breaking. The story didn't close with peace, or certainty, or safety. It closed with direction. And for once, that was enough. The end. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more HFY Sci-Fi romances, and let me know in the comments if you'd follow these two into the next chapter of the galaxy.